It's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. Hello from the webcam. Once again, my excuse this week for not using my customary setup is that I'm feeling a little under the weather, so I hope that's cool with everybody. The first question this week comes from Hipster Shining Armor, who says, Steve, with regards to some of the issues you've mentioned about sexism in the atheist community, I think the points you made are generally correct, but I have another theory about why that is that I haven't seen many other people really talk about much. Specifically, the fact that so much of online atheism was based around the ideas of rationality and reason and skepticism, so much so that they were basically used as catchphrases. This was a good thing at heart, but it presented a problem, namely that once you convince someone that they're totally rational and everything they believe is because of completely objective research and inquiry, then they're not really going to re-examine the beliefs and ideas they hold true, or even if they are, they're usually just going to end up reaffirming their own preconceived biases. Do you think I could be on the right track here, or am I way off base? Oh, Jesus Christ, are you onto something there? Yeah, absolutely. I see things very much the same way. There is definitely a big problem in the atheist community with atheists having convinced themselves that because we have discarded religion or rejected religion, that somehow we have gained an epistemological advantage on people, that we are the rational ones and the objective ones and the unbiased ones, and all those religious people. Well, yeah, I mean they're making their decisions and they're basing their beliefs on all these really biased, irrational things. They're influenced by their churches and by their cultures, and we don't have to worry about any of that because we're atheists and we're objective. That's not the attitude you want to have if you truly care about getting things right, if you truly care about understanding things, if you truly care about truth and knowledge, and most particularly if you care about understanding what other people are going through or understanding the experience of other people who have lives that are very much different than yours, who interact with society and culture in ways on very different terms than yours. That's where we get into thoughts and ideas about oppression and privilege and social and political equality, when you recognize that there are people who engage with the world under a very different set of rules than other people. The set of rules by which I engage with society as a cisgender, hetero, white man are very different than the set of rules that, say, women or black folks or people of color in general or LGBTQ folk engage with the world. And if I convince myself that, well, my viewpoint is the objective one and my conclusions are the right ones because I'm rational and I'm reasonable and I'm unbiased and I'm objective, I'm just fooling myself. And I'm granting myself yet another privilege that I have done nothing to earn. The fact that I'm an atheist and the fact that I have rejected religion and I don't believe that gods exist does not exempt me from being subject to biases, to being subject to prejudices, to ignorance, to personal shortcomings. It does not inoculate me against being influenced by my culture, by the attitudes of people around me. None of that changes for me just because I'm an atheist. And yet there are atheists, including very popular atheists on YouTube who have large followings, who seem to think that just because they're an atheist, that makes them objective. That their thoughts and conclusions on religions, even religions with which they have very little personal experience, religions that they have not grown up in, religions that are popular in cultures they have never been to or never lived in, that somehow the mere fact that they're an atheist makes their opinion worth more than someone else because their atheism makes them objective. Atheists are not objective on matters of religion. Atheists are not unbiased on matters of religion. And the lie that some of us tell ourselves that we are, the amount of self-flattery that goes on with many atheists is just appalling. Hexer Sigh, hey Steve, silly question. If all people were born with a random superpower, what superpower would you hope to have? More serious, but still silly question, how would we have to deal with people whose superpower could be problematic to society? Like someone's ability to copy objects who will duplicate their own money. someone who can teleport and would be extremely hard to catch, or someone who is just too clumsy to control their power and frequently causes accidents. Can these people even be imprisoned for their super actions, or should they be put in coma during their prison sentence? What about people toxic to the touch? Would you execute really dangerous individuals? To answer your first silly question, the power I would wish to have would probably be the ability to fly. That's probably the one that a lot of people say. But if you've ever had a dream where you're flying, it's an incredibly liberating feeling, and it's overwhelming, the thought of being able to lift up off the ground and fly under your own power. That's the one I would pick. I don't care what anybody says of how, what would be a better power. You should choose this one or that one. I would choose the ability to fly. So there. And as for your second silly question, see, to me, that's one of the most interesting questions that is raised by superhero stories. And some of the best superhero stories are the ones that have attempted to grapple with that question in a meaningful way. The X-Men stories have touched on that multiple times throughout the years in the comics. It was mentioned in the first X-Men movie, Bryan Singer's original X-Men, where they talk about the Mutant Registration Act and what do you? It's one thing to regulate dangerous weapons, but what if the weapon is a person? How does society continue to exist as it is if you have human beings who, just as a part of their natural innate abilities, can walk through walls, or read people's minds, or move objects through, as Captain Kirk would say, telekinesis? How does society continue to function when you begin to have people manifesting such abilities completely naturally? And it's a really tough question to answer. And it's a question that I'm kind of glad we'll probably never have to actually struggle with. Because if people start to gain these unusual abilities through unnatural means, through some kind of augmentation or genetic engineering or something like that, you can always just regulate whatever it is that gives them the power. You can say, well, okay, well, this is going to be too disruptive to society, so you're just not going to be allowed to do this anymore. But if people were manifesting these powers just naturally, and it was just a part of who they are, I think the only fair thing to do would be to radically reinterpret the social contract, and to really significantly, fundamentally alter our expectations and our understanding of what our society is, and what our rights are, and what our fundamental duties to one another are. I think there would be no other way to do it. You can't just imprison people for having natural abilities. You can't just say, well, oh, Jesus, you mean she can walk through walls? Well, we're going to have to lock her up. I don't know how we're going to lock up someone who can walk through walls, but we'll figure something out. We'll sedate her or something. We'll just keep her in prison forever. You can't do that. I mean, she didn't do anything wrong. It's not her fault. The thing that your question made me think of was, in Star Trek, there's the Betazoid species, which is where Counselor Troy comes from, who can read people's minds. And on Beta Z, where it's just nothing but people reading each other's minds, they don't really seem to have an expectation of internal privacy, because they're just reading each other's minds all the time. And when the crew of the Enterprise first encounter a full-blooded Betazoid, I think it was Troy's mother, who can just straight up read people's thoughts, it's extremely intrusive to them. They're like, what are you doing? You can't read my thoughts. These are my internal thoughts. You can't just invade my mind. But to her, it's no big deal, because she grew up in a society where people were reading each other's minds all the time. And she just doesn't have that expectation of internal privacy, which is completely alien and radical to us, because to us, that's an essential part of who we are. So I think in such a society where people started manifesting these powers that allowed them to easily just transgress these established boundaries, we would have to redraw the boundaries. And that's not something that would be easy, and that's not something that could be done within one or maybe even 2 or 3 generations. Like, society would just have to evolve over a great deal of time to accommodate people being able to do these things. That's the only answer I can think of that would be fair to everybody. Joe McClory, a friend of mine who I've known for years but have never met, died recently. I've never dealt well with death, and even when I was Catholic, my greatest fear has been the oblivion of death. He too was atheist and was pragmatic, to the point that he would have good-naturedly given me crap for getting sentimental about his passing. but still it hurts when I see his name as offline on my friends list, and the idea of taking him off the list hurts more. I'm having trouble finding closure, knowing how best to honor and remember someone I never met in person and who might as well think I was silly for wanting to. Have you ever had an online friend die and you know about it? Do you have any advice either way? Unfortunately, I have had several acquaintances that I knew online but had never met in person die over the years. I've never lost anyone who I was really very, very close to. So I've never lost an online friend who I was close enough with that I grieved, that I felt a real impact by it. But it sounds a lot like the problem, when someone in real life dies, and you see their number in your phone, you see they're still in your contact list, and you think, should I leave that there, or should I take that out? What does it mean either way? If I delete their contact information because I know I'm never going to use it again, they're dead. What does that mean? Does that mean I'm forgetting about them? Does that mean I'm pushing them aside? That might not feel right. You want to honor their memory. You don't want to forget about them. But then at the same time, what are you doing keeping a number in your contact list that you're never going to call? Is it too sentimental? Is it morbid? Is it something that maybe you're holding on to that you shouldn't, that you should just let go? And there's no right answer to any of these questions. When you see your friend's name in your online and you see that your friend is offline, you miss them, you hurt for them, you wish that they were still here. And the right answer is if and when you decide that it's time to remove them from your contact list so that you don't see that name offline every time you sign on or whatever, then that's the best thing for you to do. It's whatever it is. It's whenever you're ready. The grieving process is not something that you just follow a checklist, where it's like, okay, well, it's been 2 weeks since they died, so I should be right here, so I'm going to do this. That's not the way it works, and I don't think it's any different whether the person was a friend that you only knew through the internet or the person was a friend that you knew through, physical, personal interaction. They still leave a hole when they're gone. They still have a presence in your life that you miss when it's not there. And however you choose to deal with that, whether you choose to just delete them and unfriend them or whatever and move on, or whether you choose to keep them there, keep their page, keep their profile linked to yours as some kind of memorial, or because it gives you some comfort, or it helps you remember them, or because you just can't bear to let them go. You feel like maybe that's just a little piece of them that you can hold on to. Whatever you decide to do, I don't think it's the wrong thing. It's whatever is best for you. Your grieving process is your grieving process. And however you navigate that, there's nothing wrong with it. However you choose to get through it is okay, I think. I mean, I'm not a qualified therapist. I don't know, but that's what I think. You do what you have to do, and you deal with it. Patrick Dodds. Steve, you had mentioned that you had altered your diet to vegetarian for the last several months. Over the last several years, I've been altering my diet to something near vegetarianism. It's helped me lose nearly 150 pounds. Anyway, I've noticed in me a newfound sensitivity to the world around me. I have a twinge every time I throw a plastic bag away and hesitate to kill a pest bug. Have you had a similar increase in this phenomenon? Something like the doing away with 5 stupid things, for example. If you have, what would you chalk it up to outside of a woo-type explanation? Some years ago, a close friend of my father's had a cow that he raised and kept essentially as a pet. They named the cow. The cow got used to the people, bonded with the people. When it was time for feeding, the cow would come and knock on the back door of the house that it had access to, because it was the family became very close to this cow, almost like a pet. And then one day they shot it and ate it. And this was years ago. This was long before I ever even considered being a vegetarian. And that seemed just so wrong to me, And I mean, when you hear about, well, in some countries they eat dog, in some countries they eat cat, and that seems repellent to me, but that makes sense because I come from a culture where we're socialized to view dogs and cats as pets. I know you don't want to eat your pet. That's a pet. That's a member of your family. How could you eat that? But a cow, we live in a culture where cows are stock, where cows are raised for products, for milk and meat. And yet, the feeling of bonding with another animal, of having that animal come to depend on you for its life, and then, you take that emotional connection that you had and you just throw it aside and you say, no, but I got it for the meat and God damn it, that's what I'm going to do. Seemed really wrong to me. And it's something that's been sort of in the back of my mind ever since that happened. And that sort of feeling, that if it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. It feels hypocritical to continue eating meat with that awareness, with that feeling of wrongness, So I think that was part of it. And it hasn't increased in me since I became a vegetarian. I think I've just lost a lot of that tension that I used to have because I no longer eat meat, so it's allowed me to be a little bit more at peace, a little bit more consistent in my thinking about that, but it hasn't really increased it. If anything, it was the other way around. That's what led to it. Sabrina Lozitas Meredith. Hey, Steve, what do you think of banned films? Have you watched any of the notorious ones like Cannibal Holocaust, A Clockwork Orange, Salo, or Todd Browning's Freaks? I took a class on banned films way back when I was in college. I was surprised at the range of things that were banned at one time or another, including some of the ones above, and also things like Winnie the Pooh and Monty Python's Life of Brian. I'm against banning anything in principle. How about you? I have not seen Cannibal Holocaust or Salo, although Salo has been on my to-see list for many, many years. I just have never gotten around to actually watching it. Its director is Pier Paolo Pasolini, who is one of my favorite directors. He directed, I think, the best film ever made about Jesus. And by the way, that's an awesome range of projects on your filmography, isn't it? You do Salo, which for those of you who don't know is an adaptation of Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom. And then you also do, the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Quite a career that Pasolini had. But I have seen Clockwork Orange and I have seen Freaks. And I guess it depends on what you mean by banned. If you're asking whether or not I'm okay with a movie being banned. I don't think that the government should ban movies. I think that qualifies as censorship. That qualifies as a violation of free speech. And I would not support that. I would not support the government saying this movie is illegal. But if you're talking about being banned from a particular institution, being banned from a school or a library or what have you, I don't know. I kind of agree with what John Green said in a YouTube video a couple weeks ago. He did a video about the most banned books list coming out. And one of his novels, I think Looking for Alaska, was on the banned book list. And he said, that he thinks teachers and librarians should have control over what books are in their libraries. And it's not necessarily looking at it as banning a book. It's more just giving the person in charge of the collection the power to curate that collection. And I generally agree with that. If you are a teacher or a librarian and you feel for whatever reason that a particular book is not appropriate for your library, you don't want it in your collection, you should have the right to not have it there. If you own a bookstore, you should have the right to determine which books you stock. I don't view that as banning a book. I view that as just having the power to curate your collection. But if we're talking about government banning, if we're talking about government censorship, I am not in favor of that. Der Wunderbar Bar. I recently came home from a 4-week stay in hospital following major surgery. It went great. The surgery was a success. When was the last time you were hospitalized? Well, first of all, I'm glad to know that you're okay. I'm glad you're out of the hospital, and I'm glad that your surgery went well. I didn't even know that, so thanks for sharing. The last time I was hospitalized was 15 years ago. I think it's actually, other than when I was born, it's the only time I've ever been hospitalized. I developed a really bad case of pneumonia that I actually had for about a week before I finally went to the doctor. So by the time I went to the doctor, and he just took one look at me, gave me a really quick once-over, and he was like, "You got pneumonia. You better go to the hospital," And he called ahead, and I was admitted that day, and I ended up staying in the hospital for a week with pneumonia. I was dehydrated, and I was weak, and I was just a mess because I was such a fool that I didn't go to the doctor as soon as I started feeling bad. I was walking around with pneumonia for several days before I finally got checked out and ended up having to go to the hospital. That was the last time I was in the hospital. I'm except for allergies, I'm a pretty healthy person. I've never had any major health crises so far. And I haven't had to go to the hospital or receive any sort of major medical treatment since then. So I'm not a superstitious person, but, knock on wood, that'll continue. One thing that will not continue is this segment of the video, because as that sound effect signifies, it is now time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Ahoy Earno! Talking about movies we haven't seen, which lost movie do you really want found so you can see it? Oh, probably London After Midnight with Lon Chaney. London After Midnight was probably the first lost movie I was ever aware of. I became aware of the idea, the existence or non-existence, I should say, of lost films by learning about London After Midnight. So I would probably want to see that most of all. Or maybe the 9.5-hour cut of Greed, the original Eric von Stroheim director's cut of Greed. I'd watch that once just to say I saw it. Knight 6831, Dear Steve, my question is, how would the 9/11 truthers react to Cineflix making an air crash investigation episode on American Airlines Flight 77, which is going to be done in season 16? Air Crash Investigation is a documentary series that looks at air crashes and shows what happened. Also, how controversial do you think the episode will be? And it's called Inside 9/11, the Pentagon Attack. Well, I mean, I don't think it'll be controversial outside of 9/11 truther circles, because most people don't hold those views. I don't think that the truth movement is anything beyond a small and ever shrinking minority. I mean, we're 15 years after 9/11 at this point. I think most people accept that it was terrorists that were responsible for 9/11. It was not an inside job. How will the truthers react? They'll react the same way they react to any investigation that disproves their preposterous conspiracy theories. They'll say it's illegitimate. They'll ignore it. They'll question the motives of the people behind it. They'll complain that it's biased or that it's full of lies or mainstream media, blah, blah, blah. They'll reject it the same way they reject every other fact that makes their theory impossible. Lucas Hackett, One Angry Brony. Hey Steve, would you pay to see a Hell in a Cell match between Todd Chrisley from Chrisley Knows Best and Willie Robertson from Duck Dynasty? If so, who would you want to win and why? I had no idea who Todd Chrisley was until I saw your question and had to look it up, and I have never watched a single episode of Duck Dynasty. I only know the Robertsons from when they say awful things that are picked up in the media. So, I mean, I have the WWE network, so I wouldn't have to pay anything extra to see the match. I could just watch it along with all the other content. And who would I want to win and why? I would have to book the run-in that case. Lucas, I would have to book Brock Lesnar to come in and have the match end in a no contest, and Brock would take both Mr. Chrisley and Mr. Robinson to Suplex City. That would be the best finish I could imagine. Francois Lacombe, hey, you're supposed to review classic movies and see if they deserve their reputations. Interesting as it is, how is that Fantastic Four movie a classic? Referring to the recent review of the 1994 Fantastic Four film that Jason and I did on our Late Seating podcast. You know, Francois, the process by which we choose the movies for Late Seating is something that you probably aren't aware of. Jason emails me and says, we're doing this movie. And I say, okay. I don't ask questions because Jason's the boss. And he's got a really, really bad temper and a lot of puppets that can back him up. So when he tells you to do something, you kind of just have to do it. You know, that's how I've stayed alive this long, being his friend. So when he says, we're doing the Fantastic Four from 1994, I say, okay, yes, sir. And that's the way it goes. And I get to live to record another podcast. That's how it goes. Chrisiosity, is Donald Trump the embodiment of toxic masculinity? If he's not, he's as close as anybody I can think of, at least with that level of fame. I mean, I'm sure there are other people who are less famous on a national or international level that are more full embodiments of toxic masculinity than Trump. But of people at his level of social status, yeah, he's got to be it, right? God, I hope there's nobody worse than him. Radical Bacon, do you remember when you learned to read? Sort of. I was really young. I remember my mom coming in with some books, some, teach your kid how to read type of books when I was about 4. And I think she actually said, okay, now we're going to teach you how to read. And I mean, it took a lot longer than that. It wasn't just that one lesson. And I was like, oh, I get this. But yeah, I learned to read, I think maybe before I was even in preschool. Early the learning to read process began. I didn't learn to read all, but yeah, I sort of remember it. And I remember my mom coming to me with books and saying, it's time to learn to read. John Schrader, if you were to be reborn as a Muppet, what would be your Muppet quirk? My Muppet quirk would be a non-removable hat, but a removable beard. That would be my Muppet quirk. Hey, that's it for the questions. That's it for the lightning round. It's time for the shout out. And the shout out this week, as always, goes to a very, very deserving person. It goes to my fellow YouTuber, Milo Stewart. I was just talking in an earlier question on this video about the importance of not thinking of yourself as having all the answers, not thinking of yourself as being the objective, rational, unbiased person. And part of understanding other people, part of caring about people who come from different backgrounds than yours, is being open and listening to people who come from those backgrounds. And Milo is a young trans man who speaks about his experiences being trans, who speaks about his thoughts and opinions on issues that affect trans folk. And I think Milo is one of many, 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 many voices that you should listen to, you should seek out and pay attention to, so you can get some idea, if you are a cis person, of what it's like to be a trans person in this society, what it's like to navigate the obstacles that are placed in front of you. Milo is, he's really young. I think he's like 17 or 18 years old. He is a very energetic, very articulate, very enthusiastic voice. And I think he's someone who, if you care about trans issues, if you care about trans equality, if you care about just knowing what life is like for someone who comes from a very different background than yours, if you happen, like me, to be a cis person, he is someone definitely worth checking out. And short videos, really, really quick to the point, incredibly charismatic on camera, really, really nice just to watch and listen to. Highly recommended. Check out Milo Stewart. I also want to recommend the aforementioned Lemme Listen podcasts, created, produced, hosted by my very dear friend and high overlord, Jason Harding, the puppet master of Opinionville. Jason hosts and creates 3 podcasts, all of which are excellent, all of which deserve your attention. There is Let Me Finish, which he co-hosts with Finite Atticus. There is American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, which is an improv comedy podcast that is just hilarious. And there is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that Jason co-hosts with me, where we look at classic films, we give them a fresh review, we decide whether or not they deserve their reputations, whether that reputation be that they are great or that they are awful. You can listen to our most recent episode that dropped last week, the 1994 Fantastic Four film. You can listen to all of our past episodes and all of the episodes of all of the Lemme Listen family of podcasts by going to LemmeListenPodcasts.com. And I sure hope you do. That's it for me, everybody. I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until then, take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to www.patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.